Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the January 14th Nature Center Task Force. We got a full agenda tonight, which I appreciate you taking time out of your day to support this work. Again, for the audience at home and for the group here, a reminder, I'm Mike Sable. I'm the Assistant City Manager, HR Director for the City of Maplewood. I will be your host and guide for the night. Want to let everybody kind of introduce themselves again. And why you're here, but also to make sure your audio works for the group.
Mike, your audio keeps cutting out.
Yeah, your audio cuts in and out.
This is why we test the meeting. How's that better? I have two microphones, unfortunately, and the default one is glitchy, so I appreciate you pointing that out. Again, I'm Mike Sable with the city. We will do introductions. I think you're familiar with the flow, so I will call Jim, then Marge, then Audra. If you could share what you're looking forward to doing in 2021 and let us know who you are and what you're doing on the committee, we can go from there. So Jim, take us off, please.
Good morning, or good evening, I guess. It's been a long day already. Jim Beardsley, I'm the president of the Friends of Maplewood Nature Center and Preserves. What do I want to do in 2021? I want to get outside and enjoy the garden.
Excellent. I saw your, there was a picture of a rose on your, when you turn your camera off. It's beautiful. So we're looking forward to that, to seeing more of that.
That's one that was growing in my backyard.
Nice. Marge, if you go next, then Audra, then Simba, please.
Sure. Hi, Marge Sagstetter, City of Oakdale, and concerned and interested party. I'm looking forward to just seeing people and hugging again.
Good. Your audio sounds good. Thanks, Marge. Audra, then Simba, then Joe Sheeran, please.
Sure. Audra Robbins, Parks and Recreation Manager, and I'm looking forward to going to a concert. At this point, a concert anywhere, but hearing live music again is what I'm most looking forward to.
Good. Thank you. Simba, Joe, then Melinda, please.
Simba Blood with the Ramsey Washington Metro Watershed District. I'm also really looking forward to live music, but just going out and being with other people.
Good, thank you. Joe, Melinda, then Kathy Juniman, please.
Joe Sheeran, Communications Manager, City of Maplewood. 2021, I'm looking forward to just getting on a plane and getting out of here for a couple of days. So we'll see when we'll see when that opportunity comes.
Good. Thank you, Joe. Audio sounds good. Melinda, then Kathy, then Becca, please.
Thanks, Melinda Coleman, City Manager. I have high hopes of seeing live music again, and also, like Joe, getting on a plane and going somewhere to see family and friends.
Good. Thank you. Kathy, and then Becca.
Hi, Kathy Juniman, City Council forever. I'm a repeater like the rest, I guess. I just want to be able to be with friends other than some way than through a screen. Mm-hmm. And most of all, getting on a plane and going to see my best friend in California.
Excellent.
High on my list.
Thank you. Becca.
Hi, I'm Becca. I am most looking forward to going to a wine tasting in person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm Mike. I want to do all of those things. I'm looking forward to doing all of them. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to share my screen just so we can kind of go over the agenda for tonight. So just so you know, we'll kind of just do some review of the work of the task force to date, and we'll try to keep it at a fairly high level. Then we're going to talk about the National Citizen Survey, and that will be kind of a combo platter of Joe Sheeran, Melinda Coleman, myself, and Audra will maybe each take a portion or talk about different segments of it. What we're really after there is just to share some high-level information, talk about how the results might change our recommendations. Then what we'd like to do is kind of finalize our recommendations for the City Council. And then at the end of it, really talk about what that council presentation would look like, who would like to do it, and kind of really finalize it. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll just say, as you know, city staff stands ready to help prepare it. So If you need talking points, we'll give talking points. If you need slide deck, we'll do slide deck. We'll make it as simple and easy as possible. But I know that the city council has said that they're interested in hearing from the members, not the staff. And so I think that's just a friendly reminder that your voice is more powerful than staff. And so we'll just we'll get folks assigned to do it. So we'll go from there. You know, I just want to, at a really high level, talk about the journey of the task force. The conversation started in earnest in June about forming the group. From at the city council perspective, really, the closure of the nature center was abrupt at the time because there was so much uncertainty, but the decision was made to make hard choices early rather than later. It really bought this group some time to really think through. And so at a really high level, we did some evaluation of the existing programming and services that the Nature Center runs. We did a pretty robust evaluation of what other nature centers, how they operate, pros and cons. You know, I learned a lot about all of the nature centers in the region. We got to hear from our finance director staff and from the city manager about some of the challenges that the city faces in delivering services. Those challenges haven't changed very much. There's still really high demand and decreased revenues across the board in terms of city operations. And so I got a pretty deep understanding of kind of how the financials work. Then we really got into what was important for the group. What are the key areas about where you wanted to make recommendations, what those recommendations would look like in terms of implementation phase, whether it was short-term, medium-term, and longer-term, and those were sort of flexible, and there was certainly a lot of overlap, but we really kind of identified what was important for the group. Martha, welcome. How are you? I just want to hear your audio. I just want to make sure I can see you fine. I just can't quite hear you yet.
Oh, there we go. Sorry.
Oh, good. Your audio is good. Thank you. We're just kind of going through how we got to this point to date and talk about how we're going to use the information from the resident survey and then finalize our recommendations and talk about what the city council presentation would look like. I realize I ran through the summary to date fairly quickly. Are there any questions for clarity or things that I glossed over that you want a little bit of information about? How do we get to this point? And again, you can use the chat function. You can wave wildly on the screen, or you can just join in. Go ahead, Jim.
Okay, I've got two questions. Has the council been presented the survey results?
The city council has seen the one-pagers that you have seen. They have not had a chance to see the full report. The full report is being presented to them on the 25th.
So when are we going to do our presentation?
Also on the 25th. Current thinking is the city council would work in a workshop at either 6 p.m. or 6:30 the day of the meeting. Get the survey results in totality, and then see the presentations from the task forces after that. But keep in mind, the things that we'll talk about tonight, the council has seen the one-page documents. And Melinda, do you want to wait? Is there anything else to add that you can think of?
I don't really think so, Mike. We wanted the council to see what you were seeing this evening. But just in way of background, we had a little bit more difficult time with the National Citizen Survey folks in the way they presented the data and the results. And so that took us some time to work with them to have them put it in a more presentable and readable, understandable format. And so we really don't even have all of that yet. So our staff actually created the one-pager for tonight's benefit. So we will be sharing that with the council probably at 6:30 on Monday night, and then you'll give your presentations under visitor presentation, which is one of the first items on the council agenda.
Who else might have a question or have thoughts or reflections? Go ahead, Marge.
How much time are we allowed for that presentation?
So the shorter answer is you have as much time as you need. The longer answer is the council may get tired. So I would say 25 minutes at the most. Seems like a fairly decent time frame to kind of talk through each of the things. If it goes longer, it goes longer. If it's shorter, it's shorter, but that would probably be a target. Maybe Councilmember Juneman, do you, that was what was in my head, but do you have a different answer for that question?
No, I think 20 to 25 minutes, unless my colleagues seem to be engaging and maybe they may want to ask questions partway through. I don't know. But if they have some kind of a hot question that comes up while you're talking, it seems to me we should probably let them ask. Trust me, sitting up there, you can lose what you were going to ask if you don't ask it. And it would maybe help tie it together, but I'm guessing 20 to 25 minutes. It could go longer if, like I said, if we engage.
Okay. If you have another question, like I said, don't hesitate to pop it in the chat box or just shout it out. Joe Sheeran, I'll ask you if you are interested in talking about kind of how we chose the National Citizen Survey and what it is and kind of how we got there. And then while you're maybe doing a little introduction, I'll pull the document up if that's okay.
Yeah, Mike, here's my situation. What I did is Chad, while I was prepping the survey for next week for council, Chad did send me the full docs. So in addition to the one pager that we have, I also have the 3 top line numbers, so we can pull that out and look at them more closely. I think Melinda's kind of a little better suited since you guys did this last time. Let me clean that document up. I'll put it up on the screen and then you can jump in. Is that
got it? Thank you, Joe. City Manager Coleman, do you want to introduce this topic and why we do this and what it's used for?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike. The council really had not done a resident survey for probably 15 years. And I think it was 2018, we did the survey with the National Citizen Survey Group. And the reason that we do the survey, besides just wanting to kind of take the temperature of our communities, see how they feel about our services and how they're provided and other amenities in the community, we also use that for benchmarking to apply to our strategic plan. And so because of COVID this year, we actually had a plan to do it every 3 years, but because of COVID, we thought we would move it up a year just to see how our residents were doing. And then also because of the changes to recreation and programming and the nature center, we thought it would be good to try to get some data on that as well. So we are committed to doing these every 3 years. This is just a little bit of an anomaly, but the real thing that it is, it's the guideposts for us with our strategic plan.
Good, thank you. You know, the company that operates this survey is called National Citizen Survey, and they have a partnership with another digital survey company called Polco. They are, both of these firms are recognized, they focus solely on local governments, cities and counties around the country. That is their preferred marketplace. They do upwards of about 400 community surveys a year around the country. So they're a really well-established firm. They have offices in Denver and in Milwaukee area, and then also have a Washington, D.C. office. And their survey is very, so it's if you're familiar with statistical methods, it's a fairly traditional survey. It has 3 parts. One, they identify 1,200 households in the city that they serve, that they're hired to do work. And they do a series of outreach flyers and postcards, encourage folks to that they, to alert them that the survey is coming. We also post, we put notices in our newsletter that says that the survey is coming. We try to draw some attention to this so that those residents who get this request know that it's real. Then the survey is sent out to those households. They have the choice of either filling it out in a paper format, or they are given a dedicated online code. They can go online and complete the questions. Then what they do is they try to gather those results. And a typical survey company, you typically get anywhere from 30 to 60% response. In our case, we got, they sent out 1,200 mailers. We got 437 responses. And then what they do is they then will put the response data, they'll put it into what they call cross tabs, which is, how old was the person taking the survey? What's their racial and ethnic background? They put them into categories, and then they take that data set and they compare it against what we know to be in the census data. And then they can weight scores. So if you missed an entire segment of a population or didn't sample them the same, they can alter the numbers, not the answers, but they can apply those numbers with different weights to give an approximation of the entire community. And then the other thing that they do to continue to make outreach more possible is they do a purely online survey available to all people to take, which goes up on the city's website. So they really do try to make an effort to do robust outreach. They do follow standard statistical methods. So it is a valid survey from the standpoint of methodology, and it stands. They have, if you're familiar with seeing surveys, they have plus or minus ratings. They follow sort of traditional standards. And so from that standpoint, it is a valid representation of the community, keeping in mind that some of the data has been weighted differently just to make sure that we've captured the community as it reflects. And Joe Sheeran tells me he is ready, so I'm going to make him a co-host. And Joe, I think you should be able to share your screen. Is that true?
Yeah, can you guys see it right now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, so this is the one pager that everyone received that we put together. It's fairly self-explanatory, but a couple of things we wanted to point out, some individual numbers. The overall quality of natural environment is rated at 80%. It's down slightly, but as you see, and we think this has a little bit to do with COVID and other things going on, is the importance level. So when Mike earlier a little bit alluded to how they weight scores, the way they weighted scores was they looked at how many people filled out the survey, the demographics of the folks who filled out the survey, but then they also asked people how important each one of these survey categories was. And as you see in this one, the importance level for overall quality of the environment went up by about 5%. So people were paying more attention to it. Another piece that I think we all should kind of be proud of, it's again, that hidden gem piece, is this, the availability of walking paths and walking trails. As you can see, this went up by 12%. It's higher than the national benchmark. And again, that is a good thing about our survey and doing it through this company that we work with, because they have a benchmark across the nation. So there's certain things that are always going to rate low, right? So like the value of taxes will always rate low. But when you look at us versus the rest of the nation, we're right in line with the rest of the country. People always think they can get more value. The good thing for us, though, is we're a little higher when it comes to customer service. We're at about 81% on customer service. And that's overall throughout all of the things we do for the city, from the DMV, fire, police, and park and rec. And I think the availability of walking paths may have scored higher, because if you're paying attention to both the Nature Center site and the Maplewood Park and Rec site, we did a strong push last year at the beginning of COVID to introduce people to some of our outdoor amenities, including sort of some of those hidden gems of the neighborhood preserves that were underutilized. And what we really tried to sell there is, look, if you want to social distance, here are places where, we have more than 50 parks, open spaces, trails, playgrounds. here are some hidden gems that you can kind of go and still be alone and be out in nature. So you see a jump there. And then overall preservation, natural areas, open space, and green belts. Again, the city has done a good job of trying to, in some of our planning, some of our long range planning, again, there's some growth opportunities when it comes to development, but we're really, again, with Council Member Newman's leadership, have been really strong to make sure that we're preserving natural areas, open spaces, and green belts. One of the questions we did ask when we, again, put the park and rec system on hold is how do we pay for this? One of the things that our city council really asked us to do is how do we come up with a sustainable model for moving this forward? And we were very pointed about this. As you can see, we asked, do you want to outsource it? Not very popular. Cost sharing, again, which is nice, not only with the folks who are on this call, but our park and rec task force as well. How do we get to, because we looked at the numbers and we saw that, of the people who used Maplewood Nature Center programs and Maplewood Park and Rec programs, only 33% actually lived in the city. The other 2/3 lived Oakdale, St. Paul, other parts of the East Metro. The one piece here that stands out is increased participant fees. We understand there's not a real appetite to push the cost on to the backs. I mean, we're catering to middle income, working class families. Not a lot of appetite to do that, which is interesting to see. And then again, keep the current funding system, which could increase property taxes. We see that about 30%. So it's kind of an even, interesting breakdown. There's some other statistics here that I just broke out. Overall recreational opportunities, quality of recreation programs. These are all consistent with what they are from the 2018 survey. But we have, especially when it comes to two things to kind of mention here, some of the overall recreational opportunities and quality of the programming, I think was skewed because we suspended all of that programming when COVID hit. So you see some of those numbers are a little below, but they're on par, slightly below, but generally on par with what they were in 2018. But you see some of this, again, the things that we, from a communication standpoint, and when I say communications, I mean overall, what Nature Center pushes through their one-on-ones, with Park and Rec pushes through its one-on-ones, quality of recycling, our water resources and lakes, and quality of yard waste pickup. It's good to see those numbers that are up a little higher, just because they're things we pay attention to and concentrate a lot on. And that wraps up our slideshow. I don't know if I want to toss it back to Mike, or Mike, if there's any other. Oh, the one big thing, and I'll end the slideshow here, but the one big thing that we have an opportunity to point out, and it was actually hidden, as you see that last number there, that 48%. So essentially, when you break down the numbers, overall, about 80% of folks feel that Maplewood's a great place to live. So when you have 80% that feel Maplewood's a great place to live, 81% rate customer service high, where's that disconnect there? Overall sense of community is only 48%. So where's that disconnect? And now I think that's an opportunity, again, between the Nature Center and Park and Rec, and some of the other outreach we do in police community relations and public safety community relations, that how do we figure out ways to get people out of their neighborhood and connect with the larger community? And maybe the Nature Center plays a role in that going forward.
Thanks, Joe. What I'll do is I'll ask the group if you have questions or responses to some of the data. Really, this is kind of an opportunity to do some open dialogue. And just so you know, I do have the full survey available. So if there's a very specific question that you would want asked, I think I can probably answer it. Just to give you a sense of scale, we asked over 150 questions. Some of them are related to mobility and transportation. Some of them are related to water quality and utility services. So it really does kind of run the full spectrum of services. But I'll stop there and open it up for folks who have questions or reactions to the data. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, the Friends Board met last night. quickly reviewed the slides that you guys presented us. And the overall feeling was that combining the participant fees and the current funding method, that 57% of the residents or the respondents were willing to pay more for what they were already getting. And we thought that was very critical to keep in mind, not just the 38% for the partnership, but if we're looking at a funding, maybe we can break it out 3 ways. The partnership, the fees, and the tax increase to come up with the way to fund this a sustainable way, rather than just relying on maybe one of them.
Thank you. That would be about a third, a third, a third. Is is that accurate reflection of what you just said, Jim?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Kathy Juneman, raise your hand. Go ahead, Kathy.
Thank you. Yes, sir. I was a little surprised by the responses when it came to the funding thing as well. But I do think it tells us something, that we sometimes think when we hear a lot of what I call squeaking about taxes, sometimes that's just what people do. And when you make them try and tell you what kind of choices they want to make, usually they don't want to make any, meaning they want things to stay at least the way they are. But here you have people actually saying, hey, if you have to put it on the tax levy, you have to put it on the tax levy. We want it. So it does give us some ability to say at least part of it, we are getting permission from people to make sure it's here. And that's reassuring. Not that you just keep doing that as the only way to do it. That's not my point at all. But it does tell you it's a valuable asset and people are willing to pay for it. And so that helps us with, as Jim said, it's some of each. And for a bazillion years, which I think that's a whole damn now, have really believed that if you're honest with taxpayers and say, if you want this, you're going to have to pay for it, 9 times out of 10, you will get a response that helps guide you. And 9 times out of 10, it is my belief, they will say, fine, as long as it's not out of line. If you back people to the wall with the truth, they're going to give you a truthful answer. And this says, we want this. And I think it's interesting that they don't want you to raise the fees. That's pretty entertaining to me. But it doesn't mean you can't. I'm just saying it's interesting to know that they are saying, maybe we want to help you have a pad where this exists, and then we use the other 2 methods as well. It's just interesting to see that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Martha.
Just that it was interesting, and I can't think of the other word I'm trying to say, but I thought it was a good thing that the wanting to outsource or privatize was really low. I thought that encouraging, that's the word I was looking for. That, it shows a lot about that people care about it being locally controlled, sort of. And I think that it sort of fits with that overall sense of community, that if it were to be privatized, I feel like that's where that overall sense of community would probably go down for that type of thing. And I think, to Kathy's point about, it's interesting that the participant fees was lower than the other 2. And I think probably because, with an increase in property tax, the increase happens and then you don't really think about it. Whereas the participant fee is, a more immediate, and especially if fees might be a harder thing for people to take care of now anyways, thinking of increasing those, I can see why that was a little bit lower.
Thank you.
Mike?
Others? Yes, who is that?
It's Kathy again.
Yep.
About the sense of community thing, I think that the Nature Center does and can play a role in that for sure. And so does Parks and Recreation. But always I think we will be haunted by the fact that we don't have a gathering downtown. That's just how it is. And so And especially as new populations move in, if they've learned in other settings that a town has a center and we don't have one, then there's not that sense of community. So it depends on how you define community. So that might be kind of like, if you will, vague question, because everybody might have a different idea of what that means. But I do think the absence of a gathering spot that is, if you will, the funny old downtown Maplewood is, I think that's part of that. And so, which in my mind puts more responsibility on us to do more community programs that come through parks and rec and the nature center, because those are the things that can pull people together. As we saw pre-COVID, those nights in the park were just astounding. You know, when you're handing out 800 hot dogs in one night, there's a lot of people around. And so I think that just tells us those are significant players in our city. And that's where a lot of the sense of community comes from.
Thank you. Others?
The one comment, speaking of community engagement, the one comment I will make is we asked a specific question because we wanted to learn more about how effective our police and public safety community engagement is. And we essentially found out that 22% of the folks who filled out the survey had attended some kind of police community engagement, which sounds low, but since this is fairly new, and they've been doing a good job of micro targeting to certain types of housing units, it was a good number. And what was encouraging there, to Kathy's point, is 90% rated it positively. So that shows there's an opportunity there that the more you do, I don't know how that's going to build the sense of community, but those outreach opportunities are really, really important because they're effective.
Cool.
Thank you, Joe. Becca, you popped up on screen. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a question, and you may have answered this earlier, but I just didn't get it in my head. How was the survey initially distributed to the participants? Was it an electronic survey or was it a mail-in survey?
So they identified 1,200 households and did a mail survey with the option to fill it out online. So if you got the postcard that says you were selected, you had the option to go do it online. And I think more than 50% who got it, or I'm sorry, more than 50% who filled it out did it online.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. One of the interesting things that we ask about is, and I don't want to dive too deep into the quality of life piece, but I am going to share the screen just for a second here. Can everybody see this? We ask questions about the community design. And one of the interesting things is, please rate the following aspects of quality of life. We actually ask about your neighborhood as a place to live. And we saw a 6.5% increase in the answer to 85% of people like their immediate neighborhood. But what's interesting is they don't feel connected to the city as a whole. And I think, to Councilmember Juneman's point, that really is an opportunity for the city to sort of create that connection in the minds of folks. So they like where they live, they love their neighborhood, but they're not connected to the city in the same way. And so that and this is going to be no surprise, but as a data nerd, that's really exciting for me, right? I mean, because that's like, oh, well, we could actually do something about that. And part of the joy of having good numbers about how the community feels about where they're at is we can actually make improvements, and we can do things in a concrete way to make them better. And so, this information is only as useful if you use it. It's only interesting if you do something with it. And so, from that standpoint, I think there's a lot of rich data in here, and it does help frame up the conversation about how to use this information kind of moving forward. That's my plug for data scientists. I'll stop now. Audra or Melinda, is there anything you'd like to add about either the results or kind of how you see this group using it or city staff using it moving forward?
And the only thing that I would add is I agree. I thought that was not startling, but it was really interesting that people were happy with where they lived in their neighborhood, but not feeling connected to the city. And I agree with you that there's a lot of room for growth and opportunity there to just, I can see that number increasing depending on what we do going forward. So I agree. That was probably the most interesting takeaway that I had, other than that, as you've said before, that people were willing to look for other options other than privatization. It was good to get the feedback just to see where people's minds were at. So.
Good. Thank you. City Manager Coleman, anything you'd like to add?
No, thank you.
Okay, appreciate it. Joe, you're sharing your screen again. And you're muted. Joe Sheeran.
Yeah, sorry guys. This is the one thing I want to tie back to, because we do a lot, we talk a lot, but we want to make sure that our strategic, what we do in this committee and this task force, what we've done with the survey ties back to our strategic plan. And everything that we're talking about ties into every one of these strategic plans. Community inclusiveness is critical when it comes to Park and Rec and Nature Center. Fiscal stability, that's why we're here, because we were running this thing at a deficit to the city. Infrastructure and asset management, those parks cost and those trails are expensive to maintain, but if you maintain them well, they pay off. Integrated communications, we need to get the word out and make sure people know about these opportunities. And then the other two really work hand in hand, because if your redevelopment's all over the place and you're eating away your park space, or you're not integrating your park space and your trail space in your development. So I just want to really stress how important the work you guys are doing here, that it ties back to all. I mean, this is one of the only ones where they all tie back.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Thank you, Joe. All right. Any final comments or final questions regarding information? Martha, you popped up on screen, and go ahead.
This might not be the time for this, but it was something that I thought of in the conversation in talking about, because I identify with the data that I like my neighborhood, but I don't necessarily feel a greater sense of overall Maplewood community. So that data resonates with me. But in thinking about the sense of community, I do feel it comes from some of those events and things that we've attended, those Parks and Rec events, and even, some of the classes at the community center when that was open. And it just kind of made me think that perhaps as we are coming out of COVID at some point and getting Parks and Rec and Nature Center back up, maybe there's some bigger collaborative, grand reopening type event that is some like Maplewood passport, where residents could get, some kind of booklet, and every time you stop in at a park or participate in an event, you get some stamp, just to kind of encourage people to visit all those different places. And I don't know what the capacity is to have different events throughout a summer or something to beef it up more than maybe you would normally have in a summer, to really put a big push out to get people out to events and out to different places.
I see Audra taking notes, so I can.
I am.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific idea and a really a nice opportunity to connect. I I saw Kathy Juniman raise her hand and Joe Sheeran unmuted, so I'm going to say that those are 1, 2. Kathy, go ahead.
And this whole community involvement and places and how to do it. I've often thought that we have the 2 cooperative gyms, one at Carver and one at Edgerton. And I think both the school and we have been too limited in our thinking about those. And I think Edgerton does quite well because there's a lot of multiple dwellings around there. So when you have an event, but I think the people in Western Hills and the rest of the Parkside area don't realize what kind of engagement goes on there. So I'm thinking maybe a little better outreach around those 2 places so that people see that they can be engaged at the school with the community. I just think that there is some natural tendency to want that to be there. And so as long as we have those agreements, I think maybe we should capitalize on them slightly more, particularly if we're talking about how do we have more events where we can engage more people. It might take a little while to catch on, but it's just amazing. Edgerton School's old and been there a long time. And until quite recently, they had a carnival every year and you couldn't park for blocks. And people who hadn't had kids in the school for 20 years still went to the Edgerton Carnival because of the sense they got of being together. And so I think there's maybe some way there we could maybe make better use of our cooperative efforts in those 2 places.
Thank you. Joe, you unmuted. I don't know if you wanted to speak or if you were just unmuting.
To Martha's point, I think, and again, to Councilmember Juniman's point, I think that's a great idea when you talk about collaborations and partnerships, because I think the beauty of a passport style event or a passport style initiative is we can get folks from other Ramsey County communities that have natural amenities, and we could do a sharing. So the passport's not just a Maplewood passport, it is an East Metro passport, so that folks in other parts of the East Metro visit us, and then we send our folks to other places. Thinking about this more along what they do out west with the Three Rivers Park District, you're mixing and matching amenities of everybody. So I think if we go that route, that might be a way to go, is to partner with other communities.
Yeah.
Get their folks over to us too.
Maybe we can get a caveman and ice in one of our parks too. I don't know if any of you saw that, but I'm jealous.
That's
I want
cool.
one.
That's cool.
That was a little weird.
Yeah, it was.
Or a stainless steel obelisk.
That was at least interesting because they put the obelisk in really cool spots in the world, right? I mean, they ended up in really cool spots. So that was really good. So the question, I guess, that I will ask the group, and thinking about sort of our recommendation categories, and if you don't remember what they are, I'll share them with you. But one, it was about the physical asset and getting the best use of the site and building. Partnership and prioritization was a key area. The third category was the sort of the service levels business model, which is who our target audience is, what are the things that we're after for doing. The fourth component was the financial investment and capital operations. The fifth was around environmental education. And then the last one was around volunteer coordination and volunteer base. And so thinking of those sort of broad categories, what information out of the community survey impacts any of our recommendations, if any? And I'll say Jim shared that if you take the survey results about willingness to pay more in different ways, it could change the financial contribution piece and say, the Nature Center could strive for a mixed funding model with fees, property tax support, and partnership as a third. And if you remember, right now, the subsidy is about 90% city and 10% fees for service. I throw that out there because it was brought up, but are there things that you saw that would want to change the recommendations or alter kind of how we think about our report out to the city council? And Simba, you popped up on screen. Welcome.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it actually changes the recommendation, but one thing to think about is how opportunities for volunteerism actually build community, a sense of connection. So I think it's just an added benefit of incorporating volunteer programming.
You can also make that part of your passport program.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Becca, you popped up on screen.
Well, one thing that I saw in the survey is the lack of interest in outsourcing operations of various parks and recs in the nature center. But I do think I'm of the opinion, and in that if we want to be able to do some sort of reopening, that's an option we should at least consider on a temporary basis to enter in some kind of a contractual agreement with some organization. Just I'm throwing out like Dodge Nature Center. I don't know why, but that's one that comes to my mind. To at least assume operations for a contracted period of time, well, then we're able to explore other funding opportunities such as increasing tax revenues and trying to and also look for other partnerships.
Thank you. Yeah, that temporary component of something that gets you to, that bridges you through to the next step. Martha, go ahead.
Related to that, the same piece about being interested in cost sharing, I think speaks to the partnership piece as well, that I think community would be, it sounds like would be open to partnerships, especially if it means that, you know, it's not fully reliant on taxes or fees, and just especially keeping, if the partnership, you know, continues to involve Maplewood itself as a strong component. But I could see, like Becca said, that, you know, having something temporary to bridge that gap could make sense. But I think it would be important for it to be, you know, have a time limit.
Hey, Mike, could I ask a question? Becca, when you were talking about having another group come in temporarily, were you thinking just seeing if anyone would volunteer to come in and run things, or were you thinking on a contractual pay them to come in and run things?
A contractual basis, because if we were to, if you want to be able to get some level of programming established, you need to have a body there full time. And by contracting with some organization that has all those resources at hand, they're going to be able to step in right away and just get things going sooner rather than later.
Sure, that's what I thought you meant, but I just wanted to be sure that you were talking about the city contracting for some kind of fee to have another group, professional group, come in versus just having them come in to maybe do it. Thank you.
Joe Sheeran added in the chat box with regarding some survey data that only 55% of members in the community said they had opportunities to volunteer. And so this is potentially something I know that was very specific to this task force, but it probably applies broadly if we have a dedicated opportunity to get more volunteer activities in all sorts of different areas. That sense of community, there's the potential for that to be strengthened. Joe, do you want to add anything else to that?
No, that was just an add-on to somebody talking about how to encouraging volunteers.
Okay. All right. Do you think, or Marge said, not sure if contracting is less expensive than having your own staff. That is a good question that we don't know the answer to. A lot of times when you have somebody else manage things, they have to carry their own management overhead. They've got to, either building rental, or they got to pay their, kind of different kind of fees and structures. And so it may or may not be cost effective depending on kind of the model. However, they might be, just to get into the business, they might be willing to do it. So we won't know until we try things. Is there anything in the, Jim, did you want to say something?
Well, it's just a question of, if we don't have the money now to have programs at the nature center and do these kind of things, where do we get the money to pay somebody to partnership with?
So I'm not a finance director, but I worked with them for a lot of years, and I would say government accounting has different buckets of money. So there's the sort of operating budgets that pays for staff, pays to heat, clean, and cool. It does sort of ongoing expenses, and those are sort of one bucket of money. There is a bucket of money for capital projects that pay for things ongoing that you have all the time. And then there is a category of kind of one-time expenses. If you need to get a certain piece of equipment, or you need to make a small investment one time, there's a sort of a third category of called one-time money. And if it becomes a priority for the city council, I think there's probably an opportunity to ask for, could we use some one-time dollars to get us through this time frame? I think that is certainly available. I don't know. I can't tell you if there's what the dollar amount is. Kathy Juneman raised her hand because she has more experience in the city of Maplewood than I have. Kathy, go ahead.
Okay, let's not make this grandiose. No, I think that's a good idea, and I think it's a point that needs to be made to us as a body. So that's why this group is together. What kinds of things would you recommend that we look into trying to get this going again? I mean, that's the whole point. And I don't think, I can't speak for everybody, but I don't think anybody's going to poo-poo anything right out the gate and say, well, that's never going to work. I mean, we're looking for people to say, okay, here's one of the things we talked about. And because it seems that using the facility seems to be so important to the community, the task force said, what about trying this? It gives us something to try to look at, and then kind of throw to staff and say, can we make this work or not? I mean, that's where we're going with this. And so, I wouldn't say that you would throw out any idea. I think you're doing really well. And so I just think if that you have a suspicion even that this could work, it's something you probably should recommend be looked into. That's what we're looking for, is how do you prioritize and how do you suggest we get things back on track?
Audrey, you're unmuted. Were you going to say something, or is that just?
Oh, no, I just left it off. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. City Manager Coleman, is there anything I misspoke about in terms of the finances?
I don't think you misspoke at all. I would just say that there is nothing in the 2021 budget for expenses for the Nature Center.
But Mike, that doesn't mean this task force say, hey, it might take something like this and we're asking you to look around it. That's all I'm saying. Let's not try and read where the council can or cannot go at this point, as long as you're not asking us to build on the building times too. You're saying, I just think it's worth throwing some stuff at us that we need to bounce around.
I think that's a really good comment, Kathy, and I would just add that if we did have some plans of what things we wanted to try or look at, then we could be more targeted in who we try to partner with.
Yep.
Go ahead, Martha.
I was just thinking about, we've talked a lot about like an East Metro collaboration, similar to Three Rivers, and was just thinking that if we do go along the lines of, you know, something to bridge the gap, someone contracting to manage it short term, that it might make sense for it to be an organization within that East Metro group that would be part of that collaboration long term. So it wouldn't necessarily be come in and leave, but it would be they would be also part of that longer term collaboration.
Yeah, and I think that's an important part about geography matters, and unfortunately. And so if you're going to go beyond just Ramsey County, or if you're going to go, if you're going to go with the watershed district boundaries, or you're going to go with some other kind of boundary, the design of that collaborative matters quite a bit. And Simba, you probably have more experience kind of in that realm than anybody, but that's an interesting part about the next phase of this is the recommendations are only as good as the sort of the implementing and getting these conversations started with our partners. And so maybe that's an opportunity to kind of go through the recommendations one more time to make sure that they are making sense. I have tried to edit and shrink them down whenever possible. So I'll share my screen. Can everybody see that okay? The formatting looks very similar to what you're probably used to. Again, that keeping the physical asset and the site and the building safe and maintained. We've identified sort of 6 short-term recommendations. Opening the building for some number of hours by January 31st. Now, I will say that that number said January 1st. That date has gone back, has passed, so I put January 31st. Recommend continuing ongoing maintenance of trails and grounds at current levels and continue to maintain the structure at its current level. The city is still doing that work. I know that there's a staff member popping by the site. I don't know if she comes every day, but a couple of times a week, just to kind of walk around, make sure things are looking good, still being kept and maintained. Again, support for independent groups using the outdoor areas. We provide for ADA accessible porta potty or plowing the parking lot and doing those kinds of things. So making sure that it's taken care of so the outdoor areas are being used. Last 3 items were expand information sharing with smartphone technology, ADA improvements to the front door, and we also have this one about identifying requirements to operate a daycare or nature preschool. That was a recommendation that we can certainly do going forward. I'll share my screen. And so is there anything from the survey or anything of these recommendations that you would suggest rewording or changing in any way? Go ahead, Jim.
Personally, at this point, I would take out the last one.
Okay.
Because I really don't see that fits with the goal, with the nature center. I know there are other places where they have them, but I just don't see that solves our problem at all.
Okay.
I was going to say the same thing, that I know we talked about that quite a bit, but after seeing that survey and the strong non-support for the privatization, I think that doesn't really fit. And I think Rebecca's idea of, if we're looking for a short term, something to go in there, it makes more sense to be some other nature center type space, or similar type business.
Okay. Melinda, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. The only thing that I would say to that, I don't disagree with your train of thought there, but the one thing that I thought about is if we did have some kind of lease agreement with someone to use the nature center for daycare purposes, they would be there during the day, would still have evening and weekends to do other programming, and it would give us some revenue to enhance staffing or other items that might be needed. So I'm not trying to steer this anyway, but I just wanted to point out that there might be some advantages to that, at least for a certain period of time to get some revenue.
Well, Melinda, my concern with this is if you have something like a daycare, it's there during the day when there are people who do come during the day. You've got to have some form of security. You're going to have some capital improvements to that building in order to make it suitable for that. Again, if we're talking about not having money, where does that money come from?
Thank you, Jim. Kathy Juneman, you have your hand raised.
Yes, two things. Do we want to keep January 31st as the date? Because first of all, we're not hearing this till the 25th, and the COVID thing is still pretty much up in the air because of vaccinations not moving as fast. So we maybe want to talk about that. I don't know. And the one that we took out might actually work better under the medium term then, because it kind of ties in with exploring various models and uses in the building. So you could kind of combine the two.
Okay.
I kind of agree with Kathy. Maybe that first one should be June 1st.
Or, March 31st or something.
Well, we say short term up to 6 months. That gives us 6 months.
You
Why,
can
I just, go ahead.
keep it generic and say something like spring 2021, depending on state recommended COVID guidelines.
Yeah, that was what I was gonna say. Joe beat me to it, just saying, spring as COVID allows, or, just
Yes.
so we don't tie ourselves down to a date. Knowing that it would be in that short term within the 6 months, but just
Yep.
whatever is best depending on where we are in the situation.
I'm trying to make this bigger so everybody can see it. Recommend opening the building for some number of hours as soon as practicable, spring 21, based on COVID guidelines.
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
Good.
With regard to the daycare center, one of the recommendations in the medium term was to explore various models, including daycare, full-time, part-time
Right.
camps. I put a little 3 words that said including requirements needed. So it's really an assessment. It's not a delivery mechanism. So.
Yep.
And then again, the long-term was to recommend finding a permanent long-term programming for the building. Go ahead, Martha. Oh, all right. I saw a hand. I didn't know what it was.
I was gonna add something, but I'm in the wrong category.
Okay.
Well, this is Jim. Under midterm, I don't know what I know we've talked about this somewhere else. Maybe this is physical. Maybe it fits somewhere else. But developing and instituting some online learning.
That will come down under service levels here.
Okay.
We referenced needing the infrastructure for self-guided opportunity kits with extended Wi-Fi to support technology on sites and trails. So you need the infrastructure to support the program. So I think we will make sure that we're capturing both of those elements. But we can, you can put a Wi-Fi booster midway through the trail system, and that would help, so to speak. And Audra, I know you've got a couple of projects going on site, probably as soon as next week or 2 weeks from now. Do you want to update kind of the group on the physical assets and infrastructure improvements you're doing now?
Sure. Yeah. It would be part of the nature and center improvements that we talked about earlier, with replacing the bridges, the observation deck, doing the stairs and sections of the boardwalk. And we're getting close to the point all the bridges will be made custom, and the contractor is going to let me know as soon as they're in their last stage of fabrication. That'll give us a week out, but then we will have to work with park maintenance to close down the trails and get the word out. So there will be a time coming up now where we will have to close off access to the trails to get those put in. The one thing that I know is going to wait for spring would be replacing the stairs up to the neighborhood, but the rest of it, they'll be doing work on all the other things incrementally. So we'll be working with Joe in communications to get the word out and with park maintenance, but there will be some closing down of the trails for safety.
All right, thank you.
And Audra, at our meeting, at the board meeting last night, it was mentioned that there was some graffiti spray painted on some of the trees that was not appropriate.
Yep, we got it. Well, for what we could do, there was a really large tree that looks like Hugo Tree Service didn't pull it out. Sometimes they let them stay and kind of naturally decompose, but it was a very large tree and it was very frozen. So in the short term, park maintenance covered that up. You know, it was kind of hidden back, and then because they weren't able to with the equipment, they had to saw that section of the tree off. But they're on it, and you know, hopefully that took care of it for the short term. But
Well, that brings up the question that of not having somebody there, not having a city employee or staff or somebody to walk the trails to keep an eye on those kind of things. That's one of the risks that we run.
sure, yeah, it was actually one of our staff, the staff that Mike mentioned that had been walking the trails just to check on things, and she saw it and alerted us. But yeah, that was kind of hidden back toward the back. You know, it wasn't quite out right in the open like in the yard. But no, I agree. We always have to keep our eyes on the parks and open spaces as best as we can.
Okay. If you still have comments, please keep them coming, but I want to jump down to partnership and prioritization. We recommend doing direct outreach to watershed district for on-site programming. Make it available to that group almost immediately if they're willing to perform programming in that space. Direct outreach meetings with other nature centers to make a sales pitch for the Maplewood Nature Center and explore their interest. That could be a staff-driven activity where we just call the operators of those areas. This one is to research the Three Rivers Parks model with Ramsey County and other cities. What would it take to create an East Metro collaborative? That is something that we can certainly do and bring groups together. City of Maplewood would take the lead as the host, but be willing to collaborate and find ways to be cooperative. Identify homeschool coordination in the region. We could become, as a partner, maybe a partner agreement with the homeschool parents within the region, not just with the City of Maplewood. And then establish a city-sponsored committee for Parks Nature Center, similar to Environmental Natural Resources Committee. Create some sort of a structural group. It doesn't have to be predefined, but those were the short-term recommendations in there. And I'll stop to say, is there anything that needs to be slightly modified or changed based on the survey results or learning? Martha.
Is this where we would want to add Rebecca's suggestion of looking at options or exploring options for someone else to temporarily run something out of the building? I know watershed is specific, but if that didn't work out, or if we wanted to have other organization come in.
So if I were to identify short-term operators as a bridge to a new model, is that kind of how that would be phrased? Okay. One of the other things that we talked about doing in the short run was to draft our expectations for what a good partnership would make. True partners are participate with each other. Now that sentence is clunky. We also talk about sharing and modifying our curriculum with schools to do virtual field trip options.
Mike, I'm just making sure I'm not muted. I looked at these and I just wanted to bring this up with the group. Those are all good things to do, but again, the fact that we don't have any naturalists on staff currently, I'm just wondering if this the shared curriculum and the higher education piece might be something to move to medium term, just because there has to be someone that can do that and coordinate and pull the education together and put it out there. And we currently don't have someone in that role. And maybe that would come after partnering with, like we mentioned, maybe sharing programming with another nature center, or somehow working on that partnership piece where that could take place. But I just don't know that we have something in place in the next 6 months to maybe pull that curriculum completely together. It's just an observation I made. Not that we should take it out by any means, but maybe move that up. And I know there's kind of a break between 6 months and 18 months, but that might be a 12-month goal, but it could.
Okay. Broad objections from the group about moving that down to slightly longer term because we don't have staff to deliver it.
That makes sense.
Okay.
But
I think, go ahead, Jim.
under the connecting with Ramsey County Master Gardeners, why not connecting with the Minnesota Naturalists?
Okay. Simba, go ahead. You popped up on screen.
I did. It's just kind of maybe moving that outreach and coordination with the watershed district to a medium term, as well as there is no in-person programming going on with watershed district staff at this time.
That's a good point.
It's amazing the things that you learn when you ask questions.
I have a question for Simba. Have you discussed this with the watershed district, other personnel, about partnering with the group?
At this point, I have not had any detailed discussions with our education coordinator. I'm not sure what her plans are going forward. I mean, we're all dealing with trying to deliver our programming remotely at this point. So,
Martha, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I wonder if the watershed, just the way it's worded with just doing outreach, if that outreach piece might stay in the short term, because if it's just an initial conversation, even if they're not doing programming, if that was completed in the short term, then we're more likely to have something in place. If the outreach waits until 18 months, then it's that much longer before something might actually happen.
To explore opportunities, yeah.
Yeah, just maybe the wording change, just so it's clear that we're not expecting them to be in the building in the next 6 months necessarily.
Right.
Okay.
it's having the conversations.
Exactly.
I'm gonna write having the conversation, because
Good. Yeah.
that actually, I think people know what that means. So then I'm going to take it out of here. And then what I've got is, we've got then a series of pretty solid recommendations, 5, 8, 12 recommendations in the partnership model. So now I want to go down to the service levels and business model. Again, I'm going to take this out because this is not going to happen. We really have to identify community leaders to help with providing access to underserved communities. Consider a delivery service, bring nature center to the schools. It can help reduce costs to bring nature to them, and leverage our reputation to get the whole community involved. This really is some of the core of the work. And I think this one was,
Mike?
Yes, Kathy, go ahead.
Kathy, identifying our community leaders to help with providing access to underserved communities. Specifically, what about all the outreach our police department does? And, in the old days, a while ago, but they used to do, the cops would do fishing with kids and that type of thing, not at landfall. So in the past, some of those things have happened, and they're doing even more outreach now. So I think we could get specific about approaching our our PD in particular, because they're really heavily into community outreach and engagement.
Okay.
Could the watershed piece that you took out of short term,
Yep.
that fit in medium or long term?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, okay. Okay. Other reflections, comments? I do think that there is an opportunity, and this is, we talked very briefly about how Albert Lee, the city of Albert Lee in southern Minnesota, partnered with a group called the Blue Zones Group. And they really focused deeply on community health, and they identified these indicators that related to community health. And so this is a pretty big ask, but also probably has one of the highest potential for return. Blue Zones gets funding from the federal government. They have this really well-established model. And it's not to say that we replicate the work, but we actually could replicate the model going forward. And so I know I've had a couple of conversations with folks from Albert Lee that I worked with in the past. And so that was an interesting one, potentially as a long-term piece. Then lastly, in terms of this business model, this sort of blends into the financial investment pieces, but yearly fundraising event, annual events can do better at generating interest and anticipation. Again, finding ways to connect to community. We can develop plans for residents to establish their own native planting, so they have a connection to the building, and then they can bring it to their home. So whether it's rain gardens or I think someone said the phrase landscape architect light. Washington County has a good model. I think that's something out there. And then the other one, in terms of the business model, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Jim, this might have been your comment about exploring long-term nonprofit organizational model. Do you just have it function as a separate legal entity? It doesn't mean that it's necessarily outsourced, but does it have a separate legal entity? Maybe a modified legal structure. Looking, I don't see anybody violently upset. Go ahead, Martha.
The pieces about the fundraising and stuff made me think, and community piece made me think again about when we talked about the passport idea at the beginning. Is that something that would fit under the partnership section to explore some kind of passport partnership to not only increase the community feel, but increase just the marketing of the different spaces and encourage use? And I think Joe's comment about that being maybe not necessarily just Maplewood, but a East Metro type thing too might make sense, especially if we're exploring that type of partnership.
So I wrote, explore a Maplewood / East Metro passport model to build sense of community and expand use of the nature center. Does that capture what you just described?
Yes, I think it would expand use of just nature center and any other like natural amenities, or I mean, any of those open spaces, or even like Councilman Juniman suggested that the volunteering could be a part of that, or as much as we wanted could be incorporated into that.
Okay. Financial investment, capital operations. Establish a donation fund and fundraising. Potentially partnering with the Friends as a 501c3. A virtual silent auction to raise money. Explore established grant opportunities. Develop a GoFundMe page with the Friends group. Create a donation Dropbox somewhere on site. If we do, as we implement programming or when we implement programming, that was potentially tiered, different fee structures, and then pursue a grant to fund a naturalist position. I think those are good ideas. Audra, I'm looking to you because some of this is going to fall on you in terms of what's possible or practical. Is there something that stands out as a do not do in your mind?
I'd have some questions about the GoFundMe page just because we are depending who's establishing that, we're a government entity. So I don't know if that's appropriate for us to set up a GoFundMe page, but maybe if someone in the Friends group or someone wanted to do that on their own, but I don't know that the city doing something like that is appropriate. I just haven't explored it, but that was kind of a question I had. And then the virtual silent auction, again, it's not to try to just push everything out, but that to get quality, items that people would really want to bid on. And those kind of things take a little more time to organize than maybe someone would think. And I just think to do it right, maybe that's something we would move up to maybe midterm.
Okay.
Because we have to let them know what we would be raising money for and what's the purpose. And I think we need to develop some of these other things before we just say, hey, if you buy these items, it goes toward the nature center and what that means, just so that we do it right. Not that it's not a great idea, but.
Okay.
I don't know, Joe, what are your thoughts on that one? Because you would be heavily involved in setting up something like that and promoting it.
Yeah, I think a couple of deals. We tried this back in the fall. Or back around this time last year, we had to take a quick hiatus because of COVID. Yeah, I mean the piece of it is I'd really want to work with, when it came to anything, around charity. I'd really want to work with somebody who understands grants and works in that nonprofit space, that development space, to really make sure we're doing it the right way.
Okay. Martha.
I just wondered the tiered program payment. I know the notes there talk about it, the tiered payments being based on resident status. I don't know if there's a way to do this, but if there were a way for it to be based more on like an economic type stat, like I'm thinking of schools and how, depending on the family's economic status is how they tier those program payments.
Yeah, Martha, it gets a little complicated because privacy for people and people are very sensitive to
right.
Those kinds
That's what I figured. I just
sure. And we've gone around in the how many years I've been here. I'm gonna sound like Kathy, a long time.
Yes.
But we've gone back and forth with resident, non-resident fees. They existed when I came, then we got rid of them. They came back to, at one time it was, if we did programming at the community center, there were MCC. If you were a member to drive memberships, you got a discount on programs versus people who weren't members. And then we went the route of getting rid of the fee difference because we're a community surrounded by so many that are close but want to participate, and they thought it was a barrier. So all those things are fairly easy as far as creating it. We've got models to look at for all different ways, so that's not going to take a whole lot of time to put it together. It would just be what's best. And right now we aren't offering any programming, so I don't know if that should be in medium term or instead of short, but that's something that can be done. There's all different kinds of ways to do it depending what you want the outcome to be. But we've always in the past focused on trying to have as few barriers as possible. But then again, Maplewood, the one that's easiest would be if you're a resident and a taxpayer and you're helping fund it, then there could be a discount, and that one's probably pretty cut and dried. And then we always had the youth scholarship fund or some kind of scholarship fund through charitable gambling. That was always something that we did to kind of address that needs disparity. So
That makes sense. And
Oh.
I suppose that resident, non-resident piece might change depending on whether or not a collaborative is formed. Because if there's a
Right, right.
collaborative, that would not work so well. It'd be very
Right.
good optics to say we're going to collaborate, but everybody else has to pay more.
Right.
Thank you. So in terms of more longer or more medium term pieces, potentially establishing an endowment for fundraising. I moved tiered programming down to more medium term. Grant writing opportunities could be both short, medium, and long. I mean, I think that's a pursuit piece.
Mhm.
Consider establishing ongoing donations, like the modeled after the NPR sustaining member model, or doing some virtual silent auctions to raise money. And then the sort of the bigger topic is citywide referendum on funding. What would it take to do it? Can we use the community survey to inform the decision? And I think, as noted, I think it's 31% of people would be willing to pay for pay higher taxes in order to get a quality service. And so that's not a decision that we can make, but what are the practical considerations for what would a referendum look like? There is this bullet about recommending opening for snowshoe rentals or retail operations to get some additional revenues based on kind of where we are at today and the status of the COVID world. I don't think it's a practical piece to include in there. I'd be advocating for taking this out or modifying it. Any reactions to that or reflections? Martha.
If I'm remembering right, are there already snowshoes available? Like, I wonder if splitting that piece, that, maybe opening it for equipment rentals is something that might be easier to do medium term if that equipment is already available, whereas something bigger like a retail option is more long term.
Yeah, there are snowshoes currently there. We have several pairs of new. They were purchased for school groups and other programming, and they are there, but there was never a system set up for fees and how to return and rent them out and what best practices. So a program would have to, be put together for that. And being it was in medium, I mean, our snowshoe season is so limited, especially with our warmer winters, that it wouldn't happen probably until next season, because we're already in the middle of January. And so with it being in the medium term, so it's something that could happen. But
Okay.
I agree with Mike, it's just everything's so uncertain to be that specific with a program. Maybe we don't want to be that specific, but just look at offering programs knowing in the back of our head that we have that option to do it.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking rentals in general, snowshoe being one option.
Mm-hmm. I'll say for rentals, snowshoes, etc.
Yeah, pond guides, there could be all different kind of things technically that could maybe happen.
Did you say pond guides?
Yeah, just, activities that you can go out on the pond and do activities with your kids, or, just things that people could get and go out and do their own recreating without a naturalist on hand.
Gotcha.
I don't know if guides is the right word, but
I can.
pond kits maybe, or something like, however you'd want to say it. Just
You can do binoculars too.
Yeah, I mean, just so you can go out and do your own recreation without someone guiding you. So self-guided recreation.
I can't spell binoculars. I don't think I've ever spelled it. There we go. Sorry. And again, long-term, thinking big legacy gifts for people to leave kind of legacy gifts in their wills, or LCCMR grant funding. As folks noted, it's a big grant with some big requests. I mean, those are some longer term pieces. I think from a financial standpoint, we've got, it makes a lot of sense. There's some pretty clear short ones, some pretty clear medium ones, and some pretty clear long-term ones. Environmental education continues to be important. more connection to community ed with joint brochures, shared offerings. I don't know when they're gonna, how they're gonna show up in with so much uncertainty related to COVID, but I think something we can keep on our radar in the next 6 months. Continue to find ways to target our audiences. Joe and Andra and the team can kind of do that work. Review past programs to revive successful education programs. You know, maybe there's some things that we have that are quote unquote already in the can that we can make available. And Andra, I don't know what that is. I know that the Natural Resource Coordinator is on board. It's been hired, and you know, perhaps Carol's got some things that she can do and turn around reasonably quickly without a lot of effort. Really being specific with the age ranges and expansive to include families. And go ahead, Martha.
I was just curious with the first bullet about collaborating with Park and Rec, and I was trying to remember because I think I've done both community ed, signed up for community ed and Parks and Rec, or I mean, like nature center type stuff. Are those systems together, or are those two separate systems? Because if I was just thinking, if they're two separate like class enrollment systems, that if there were a way to combine those, that might help with some cost savings to have just one person running both of those instead of two separate entities.
Martha, could you tell me again, which two entities are you talking about?
With community ed, like the community ed, like the Parks and Rec sports pieces and like the classes, like the gardening type classes or nature center classes. I didn't know if those were all in the same sign up system and done in the same way, or if they were two separate.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, community ed is its own, you know, entity, and they have staff, and they have their own their registration program, and it's completely different, you know, separate from the city, and they are in it too. They're in the same boat we are. They have to run programs and make revenue and that kind of thing, but they're not connected the same at this point. They haven't been.
Okay, because I was just thinking that if there was a way to combine that registration process, then that maybe it would save some costs on both ends if they shared that registration in some way.
Martha, that is a terrific idea, perfectly logical, and it's been the hardest thing we've had to do. I mean it. Like, it's the easiest thing to just, well, we should just buy one system, and getting them to say yes has been almost impossible. And I don't know if it's cultural. I don't know if it's just pure turf or if it's decision-making authority, but it's been the hardest nut to crack, and we will keep doing it. We'll keep trying. This is where the collaborative, if you had 5 nature centers or 2 or 3 community ed centers, that would be the dream, and something that would make me really happy. So we will keep fighting the good fight. And Audra, you've spent 20 years in that battle.
Right.
So from a standpoint about environmental education, I think we have some pieces. We did talk about this is the teachers pay teachers model, where you can maybe opportunity to sell curriculum, maybe make a little bit of money. It's a piece on there, but really the piece on environmental education is leveraging what's out there, really finding a narrow audience that can help us be successful. So I think there's a lot that's there. And then lastly, this sort of volunteer coordination and support. Finding some sort of a central point of contact to help coordinate volunteers, whether it's the friends, whether it's some community volunteers who want to step forward. We want to make sure that we have the right technology and tools to track and align our volunteer coordinator with our peer cities and partners. that's going to be a relationship piece to really, in this short run, trying to solve for a couple of different things. This is an important position to have. It's also a hard one to fund because it doesn't work. So it is reliant on volunteers in the short run, but more medium term, recommend coordinators potentially work on site to access materials and to help train and nurture the volunteers. And so finding some more volunteer coordination and support is a key recommendation. And that is, I've got a few editing challenges down here, which I will incorporate in there, but that is the recommendations as they stand. Marge, go ahead.
Yes, I added a comment in the chat that in that last section, number 6, I think we should add, or if everyone agrees, utilize a team of volunteers to help implement or investigate those short-term goals for sure. I mean, why not use somebody here who's, if we wanted to continue on as a volunteer to help the staff.
That's a perfect thing for you to say. And I also was thinking that when we had the looking to form that committee that coordinates with, overseeing with the ENR and the PRC, if that's a recommendation we went with, they kind of go hand in hand, because that committee would be able to help with trying to implement and get going with these recommendations, was my thought. So where was that, Mike, again? I don't remember where that one was a recommendation, but it was to create the committee. I think it was early on.
Yep.
And I believe that was in the short term. So I think, oh, no.
I don't remember.
I'm getting dizzy.
Nope, I'm gonna find it
committee.
right there.
There we go.
Establish a city-sponsored committee for Parks Nature Center like ENR to look at cooperative efforts.
And I would hope members of this group would be the first logical step to look at being part of this committee. I would highly encourage and really appreciate that. So I think, is that kind of what you were referring to, Marge, or were you thinking of something separate from that?
Well, I was thinking more broadly to go through any of these. I mean, if you're going to be in charge of those, Audra, or, I don't know who in the staff leads these recommendations that move forward, but to get some volunteers to help you to say, okay, you go call them, you go do this, to help with the contacting, because there's a lot of things on this list.
There are. Yeah, Mike, again, I'm sorry, I should have printed up a copy, but with the committee, how does that recommendation read for what that committee would do? Would they just kind of?
Oh, sorry. I'm just going to search it by establish a city-sponsored committee for Parks/Nature Center like the ENR to look at cooperative efforts. And it was more of establish a structural group.
I would suggest that you do not, this is Kathy, do not equate it with ENR, because then it takes on a commission feel, and that means open meeting, blah, blah, blah. So you want to keep it a task force or a committee. You don't want it, I don't think, raise it to the level of commission, because then you get in the weeds.
Right. So does this kind of morph into maybe not just being so specific, but just having the after committee from the task force to kind of to help with implementing some of the recommendations?
Yes.
Yeah, just do some of the work.
Right.
Yep.
It's broader than just that one piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Martha, you sent in the chat box, did we want to keep exploring retail options piece for long term? And then you also raised your hand, and that might not be what we were going to talk about, but can you maybe talk about both of those things?
Oh, the retail piece, we had it together with the rental. Oh, you just passed it.
Yeah.
And they were both in the medium term, and we took it out of medium, and I just didn't know if we wanted it recaptured in long term or not. And then the other question was related to volunteers. I know, I can't remember her name, who has worked, maybe it was Jan, was talking about the importance of having staff on site to supervise the volunteers. Mm-hmm. And and I know you mentioned volunteers can be a tricky piece with insurance and all of that, but I just wondered if there's any way that, you know, you could have something like master volunteers or something that could take on, you know, to have some more training than the more casual volunteers do, and they could kind of be lead volunteers if we don't have actual staff on site.
Oh, I like the word lead for volunteers instead of master, maybe. Just
Mhm.
How's that look? Coordinators work on site to access materials. They can be on hand running volunteers, lead volunteers to train and nurture the volunteer base.
I like that.
Well, you know, the Nature Center had a list of about 100 volunteers
Mhm.
that right now are, very few are doing anything. That's a place to start.
Yep. And I think Carol probably knows all of them. What do you
She's
think?
already crafted a letter and is reaching out and
Good.
kind of getting everybody set. And we just re-upped the subscription to Volgistics will be that helps track all the volunteers. So we definitely don't want to lose that core group of volunteers.
Okay. Barring any grammatical errors that I'll go through one more time and clean up and do spacing and formatting. How do folks feel about the work that we've done to date? I'll stop sharing because it's this way you can see everybody on a big screen instead of little ones. How do folks feel? Pessimistic, optimistic, exhausted? All of it? Go ahead, Marge.
I feel a bit overwhelmed on how to cover some of these recommendations, or do we do a handout to the city council or what? Because there's so much in here.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, we'll have to have some kind of a printed copy in front of us.
So do you just pick some?
We don't track well if we don't have something in front of us.
Certainly. So I'm just wondering, like, you know, the presenters, do they just then focus on highlights or give anecdotal things like why they're there? What actually gets presented?
I'll take a crack at it, and then Melinda, Audra, and Joe will tell me what I got wrong, but it will flow like this. It'll have a council report will be written. It will provide the kind of the chronology. When was the group formed? When did they meet? Who were the members? It'll be kind of the who, what, when, where, why of the group. As an attachment to that, we will actually include all of the text of these recommendations, the categories, and then the bullets in its full form. I think from a standpoint of the presentation, it can be as robust or as little as you would like. It seems to me that a slide deck with 5, 6, 7, 8 slides would probably be appropriate. And then you can pull from as a group, we identified these 6 categories. And then within that, we think that these sample bullets are probably the most important things to focus on in the short run. And then in my experience, city councils like to have a forecast or an ask and say, you know what, we really would like you, city council, to think about some big things like establishing an East Metro Collaborative. That means, you know, directing staff to go do this work, or, you know, kind of maybe those are the pieces that I think are important. And I'm going to stop talking because I work for Melinda and I want to make sure that she has a chance to answer and kind of frame up maybe what you were thinking.
Are you talking about how much time we should take and how this should be presented, or
Yeah, and what
content, or?
Yeah.
That's a big question. I think Kathy might be better suited to how she would like to see this presented, but I do think that councils like to have recommendations and options and be able to see that whatever decisions are made, that there's going to be some results. I think it has to be broken into, I think the way that you have set this up is great. I think that the work here has just been phenomenal. I'm really grateful for everybody who has spent their time these last few months working on this on behalf of the city. It's been really, really well done. My only advice would be to try to be as succinct as possible and allow the council time for questions. I suspect, and Kathy can also weigh in on this, that this will generate quite a bit of discussion by the city council. I know there's a lot of interest in this work, and they're hopeful that there will be some things that we can carry through. That was the whole premise of why we did this. So they're looking for some really, I think, action steps that are reasonable, and I think we want some quick wins, with also being able to look into the timeframes that you've set up. So I would just say, well done. I guess I would defer to Kathy, as she's been around a very long time and kind of has the council sense of where she thinks this should be.
Councilmember Juniman, you're muted if you're trying to talk.
Sorry.
Yeah, there we go.
I have been around a long time. Longer than I care to think some days. I think Melinda's right the way she asked you to set it up, but I that's why I said we need that printed thing ahead of time. It always helps that we've had something to look at, so we know what this is about. And everybody does it differently, but let's face it, when you get a whole packet, you kind of like to know what's before you. And this is something we certainly asked for, and I've given a couple of updates along the way, so people are enthused to be getting this information. I don't know that there'll be any conclusions reached that night, but I know that you will be thanked for your work, and then we may choose to digest it for a while and then have a workshop or something, a couple meetings after that to discuss it. There'll be some questions, I'm sure, but I just think people may want time to mull it over a little bit. And we do have 2 new members, so that kind of alters it a little. They aren't as familiar with why we set this up and everything. So that will be that night, that will be kind of their introduction to that. But I do think that we're going to need, and knowing the mayor, I'm sure she's going to want us to have some time to digest and then have a meaningful conversation about the low-hanging fruit and then what we see as the next steps. And I think that one recommendation you put in of a committee moving forward to help with a lot of those things will be a very helpful thing for us to know, because staff time is already at a premium. And that's kind of what jump-started this whole crisis, is we don't have the money to pay a lot of staff. So you have to have ways that we can get started on how to get back into this business and keep it sustainable. So I think that was a very good move. And I think that will prick people's interest for sure. But I do think how you present it is totally up to you. Let your personality be part of your presentation. And I think whoever decides to do this, what your background is and what brought you to this committee, I think people are going to want to know that. And then whichever points you have chosen to bring up, you do what you want with them. I mean, that's kind of how we like things. We don't want to be the people that say, no, I want to hear this, 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 and this. That means we had to do the work. Forget that. We just want to hear what you thought and what you want to do or would like to see us do. And then I do think we may be requesting some time to digest and have our own discussion. And who knows? I mean, I don't know how this group's going to work. The group has changed, but say I've worked with more groups. I think we may even want to ask you back in on a conversation later after we've done some digesting. I don't know, but I think there's a chance that some of the key people who present, we may want to talk to again, because sometimes that does come up. If we're going to move forward, we want to do things that are solid, and we also want to keep picking your brains because you came up with such good stuff. So, I think that night we'll be very happy to hear what is presented. And like I said, I'd be very surprised if the mayor doesn't say, let us have some time to digest, and then we are going to have a workshop or whatever to talk about this. And you may well be invited back to be part of that. After all, you put a lot of effort and thought into this. So, we don't want to just say, okay, well, thank you very much for this report and move right along. I don't think that's what's in the cards.
Hey, Mike.
Yes,
One and the group, one thing I thought of is when you talked about trying to pull out ones that are, and you use the word pull out the ones that are the most important, just because of where we are with time and that this is our last meeting. Saying most important might put a lot of pressure on the group to decide which are more important. So I'm thinking maybe because the council has the whole package, because they're all important in their own way, to maybe just pick a variety, just say these are examples of. That way you don't put that onus of it most important on, and then because they'll still get the whole picture, and then it might make it a more of an open conversation. Just an observation.
That's a good point, Audra. And I guess that's why I said be yourself and use your way of presenting it, because you each have something different that you put into this and you saw in it, and that's fine. Let that come through.
We have 4 minutes left, and I'm Simba laughed. I try to be a sharp ender at the time, and so Joe Sheeran has a background in communication and is really good at this stuff. I know that Martha and Jim have been identified as people who would be really good spokespeople for the group. No one voluntold anybody else. I know we had talked about having potentially Marcy or one of the other members of the Ramsey County group as a potential speaker. What I would propose to do in the interest of time is that Joe and I will put together a sample slide deck and script and send out, and then you can modify it from there. But I would think that, and this is just my own brain working, but you have people, you have process, you have your insight and your learning, you have your recommendations, and then you have some samples, like that sprinkling of samples. And then you have what you see as next steps. And then maybe the last one is then either the ask of the council to say, continue to invest in this work, or maybe it's just a Q&A time frame and you be ready for there. So that at a high level, I think probably makes some sense.
And to even cut it out a little further, findings, recommendations, Q&A. Think about it that way. What were the findings? What do you recommend? Open it up to questions. It'll be more filled out than that, but just think about it from that perspective.
That's what you get for bringing the communications guy in. What can I say?
No, that kind of makes some sense at that point. So,
well, I kind of disagree. I think we need to get a little bit into a little bit of maybe a minute or two of background.
Oh,
basically an executive summary.
Yeah, the background is your findings. That's the background. That's part of your findings. Findings are background.
Well, and I think, people in process and, well, who are we and why are we here is probably one of those entry level pieces. So,
Mike?
Yes.
This is Kathy. I don't know, maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but what's new? Even if you're not a presenter, I can't see why anyone that's been working on this can't be in on that meeting. And, it's going to be Zoom.
Yeah, true.
So if you're interested in just being part of it and being there, I don't see anything wrong with that, because ordinarily when we do these, we have other people sitting in the audience. So I don't see why they couldn't be on the call.
Sure. I apologize for doing this. I am going to, I'm also the staff liaison to the Heritage Preservation Commission, which starts in 1 minute. So I'm going to assign Joe Sheeran to be the host.
Oh, no.
Say thank you to all of you. I really have a hard stop at 7. And so I will, I appreciate everybody. And Jim and Martha, if you're still willing to be lead presenters, Joe and I will reach out to you tomorrow to arrange for kind of whatever you need and support. So with that, thank you, everybody. I will see you later.
Thank you,
Thanks,
opioid
Mike.
facilitator man.
Bye-bye.